Why was she still breathing with the grass after 6 hours? Because one wrong breath, one misplaced twitch, could end more than her life. The elephant grass stretched nearly 7 feet high across the valley floor, moving like slow ocean waves under the dawn wind. From above, the land looked soft, lush, alive, but beneath that shimmering green was a killing ground. Cassidy Reeve knew it better than anyone. Every sound carried. Every silhouette told a story. Every shadow could hide a man with intent. She'd been there since before sunrise, lying flat on her belly in that dense sea of grass, wrapped in a ghillie suit woven with scraps of burlap and netting, bits of earth and vegetation stitched in like scars of patience. The kind of disguise only solitude could perfect. The kind of camouflage born from obsession, not orders. She hadn't moved in hours. Not really. Her breathing synced with the grass's rhythm, slow, steady, deliberate, until it seemed the field itself was alive and she was simply part of it. That was the point. That was the art. To anyone else, this valley was silent, but Cassidy heard everything. The drone of insects that rose and fell like a pulse. The faint slap of boots moving through a dry creek bed 200 meters ahead. The clipped radio murmurs of the SEAL team she was shadowing, men who didn't even know she existed. That was the job. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't on their radio net or inside their formation. She was the ghost behind their mission, the invisible eyes that caught danger before they did. Some called it guardian overwatch. Cassidy called it necessity. Her rifle rested beside her, the M110 semi-automatic sniper system. It gleamed faintly under the sun's first light, the scope lens capped until needed, the stock worn smooth from years of use. It wasn't the weapon that made her dangerous, it was her stillness. Cassidy Reeve, 30 years old, 5'7", compact, lean, deliberate in every motion. The kind of soldier who didn't waste words, didn't chase praise. Her eyes were sharp enough to catch a ripple of movement where others saw none, her instincts fine-tuned from thousands of hours studying terrain and wind. 8 years of field work had refined her into something beyond a sniper. She'd become a rhythm, a pattern of calm calculation and quiet consequence. Across the valley, the SEAL element moved with machine-like precision, 4 men led by Lieutenant Commander Ethan Ward. He was one of those men built from calm confidence and scars you couldn't see. His team moved light, quick, scanning everything. But they didn't scan high enough. They didn't know someone had been watching them for 2 days straight. Cassidy had observed their routes, their hand signals, their habits. They thought they were running an independent recon mission, deep in Kandara province, on the far side of a jungle split by the river. But their operation had been folded into something larger, something they weren't cleared to know about. And Cassidy Reeve was the reason they'd come home alive. A faint crackle broke the quiet. Overwatch, this is Guardian Actual. SEAL element approaching waypoint Charlie. Confirm position. Cassidy's finger brushed her throat mic. Her reply was barely above a whisper, but it carried clean through encrypted airwaves. Guardian Actual Overwatch. Visual on SEAL element 200 meters north, holding in tall grass. Sector clear. Copy that. Maintain surveillance. Intel reports possible hostile movement in the valley. Keep those SEALs breathing. Understood. Overwatch out. The channel fell silent again, leaving only the wind and her heartbeat. Cassidy adjusted the rifle's bipod, checking her zero, her reticle perfectly aligned with the dry creek below. Everything was habit, every motion rehearsed so deeply that it felt like breathing. She'd been here before, different valleys, different jungles, same story. Different men depending on her without knowing her name. She remembered Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all the places where her work never made reports or commendations. 143 confirmed kills, each one a problem solved before it could become a disaster. She didn't take pride in the number. She took solace in what it meant. Men who got to go home, letters that didn't have to be written to grieving families. It wasn't heroism, it was math, cold moral math. The kind nobody talked about. By late morning, the valley had turned into a furnace. Heat shimmered above the grass and the air tasted metallic. Cassidy barely noticed. The body adapts to misery if the mind knows why it's there. She learned that long ago in the Montana backcountry, tracking elk with her father through snow and silence. Out there, she'd learned the two truths that shaped her. Nature doesn't forgive distraction, and the cleanest shot is the one nobody hears. She swallowed once, slow, letting the metallic tang of heat settle behind her tongue. The seals were still advancing, crouched low through the creek bed, rifles sweeping left to right. Ward raised a fist, halt. His men froze instantly. Something had shifted. Cassidy's scope flicked eastward. For a moment there was nothing, then movement. Her pulse slowed. 1, 2, 20 figures half seen between the ridgelines. Tactical spacing, formation discipline, overlapping arcs of fire. These weren't random insurgents. This was an ambush, deliberate and professional. Machine guns, RPGs, marksman rifles. She spotted them all as if someone had painted them into the terrain. And every barrel was pointed directly toward the seals. Her mind mapped distances faster than words could form. 1,500 meters to the ridge. Wind at 3 knots west. Slight downhill angle. Temperature 94 Fahrenheit. If those gunners opened fire, the seals would be shredded in seconds. Ward's voice broke the calm. All stations, this is SEAL 1. We've got eyes on a force 20 plus bearing 090, distance 1500. They're setting up an ambush. We need fire support now. The reply came quick and hopeless. SEAL 1, Guardian actual. Closest air support 12 minutes out. Artillery unavailable, civilians in area. Disengage to alternate extraction. Ward's tone turned hard. Negative, movement equals exposure. We're pinned in open terrain. Cassidy didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew. This was going to come down to one rifle, one woman, and one series of choices that had to be perfect. She ran her hand over the M110, chambered around and whispered to herself, "All right, let's do this." Her training took over. Every instinct honed through years of stillness and violence fused into a single purpose: buy them time. She pressed her cheek to the stock, breath having, heartbeat slowing. Her world narrowed to a circle of glass, a reticle crosshair trembling over a distant figure fitting a PKM to its tripod. She keyed her mic. Guardian actual overwatch, visual on enemy position, request permission to engage. A pause, then a new voice, female, composed. Overwatch, this is Colonel Mara Holt. Confirm distance and capability. Cassidy's voice stayed level. Grid November Delta 7432, range 1700, wind 3 knots west. I can make these shots. The pause stretched again, risk weighed against instinct. Holt finally answered. Overwatch, you are clear to engage. Priority targets, heavy weapons and leadership. Keep those seals alive. Cassidy closed her eyes for half a second. Copy, engaging. She exhaled and pressed the trigger. The rifle's suppressed bark barely disturbed the valley. To her, it sounded like a breath breaking. The round leapt into the air, cutting an invisible arc of physics, 800 feet per second across 1,500 meters of humid air. 3 seconds later, the PKM gunner dropped. No sound, no warning, just the quiet thump of inevitability. Cassidy's reticle shifted before the man even hit the ground. Next target, RPG gunner. She caught the shimmer of heat off the launcher tube, watched the man lift it toward the creek bed, click. Another breath, another whisper. The weapon tumbled away from lifeless hands. The ridge exploded in confusion. Fighters yelled, scattering, firing wild at ghosts. They had no idea where she was. SEAL 1, she murmured, overwatch. 2 threats down, machine gun and RPG. Continuing engagement. Ethan Ward's voice came through the static. Overwatch, we can't even see your muzzle flash. Where the hell are you? Cassidy's lips curved faintly. That's classified, Commander. Stay low, let me work. She found a third target, a marksman with a Dragunov, sweeping his rifle with too much discipline to be ignored. Through her scope, she could see his cheek pressed to the stock, his finger tightening. He was good. He just wasn't her. Cassidy squeezed. The man folded backward like a marionette with cut strings. The ambush began to collapse. Fear bled through their formation like smoke in the wind. They were firing blind, retreating, shouting in confusion. Cassidy stayed patient, her breathing perfectly steady, each shot its own quiet promise. One leader, two marksmen, one heavy weapon, each dropped in sequence until the ridge fell silent again. The math had worked. 15 minutes later, she lifted her head slightly, scanning the horizon. The seals were still alive, moving again, low, tight, precise. Seal 1, Overwatch. Enemy broken, you're clear to move. Ward's reply was slower this time. Overwatch, whoever you are, I've never seen shooting like that. You just saved 4 lives. Cassidy smiled faintly, eyes still behind glass. Someone gotta do the impossible, Commander. Now move before they regroup. The radio clicked off. For the first time in hours, Cassidy let herself breathe fully. The rifle lay quiet beside her, metal warm from the sun. She stared across the valley, the same valley that had been designed to swallow a SEAL team whole, and felt the strange, quiet satisfaction that came only after pulling chaos back from the edge. No one would know her name, not the men she saved, not the people who'd read the after-action reports. Her work would be erased, redacted, forgotten. But the silence she'd restored, the peace that lingered after violence, that was enough. Because somewhere out there, 4 men were alive, and that to her was worth everything. She adjusted her scope again, eyes narrowing toward a flicker of movement far to the south. More fighters maneuvering to intercept the retreating SEALs. Her job wasn't done. Not yet. But that part of the story, the one that would push her rifle, her body, and her will to their limit, was still coming. And when it did, she'd rise from the grass again. How far could one person stretch the limits of a weapon and herself before something broke? Cassidy Reeve was about to find out. The SEALs had moved out, low and fast through the undergrowth, their shapes flickering between the tall grass and jungle shadow. Cassidy kept her crosshairs floating just ahead of their line of movement, scanning the flanks, checking the high ground, never letting her mind drift for more than half a breath. Then she saw it, movement again, South Ridge, subtle, quick, wrong. SEAL 1, Overwatch, she whispered, voice calm but edged with urgency. 12 hostiles maneuvering to intercept your withdrawal route. Grid November Delta 7648. They're trying to get ahead of you. There was a pause on the net. Then Logan Pierce's voice, breathless. Overwatch, we don't have eyes. Can you engage? Cassidy's jaw clenched. Engaging now. She slid her rifle around, shifting her body just enough to angle the scope southward. The grass brushed against her sleeves, whispering like ghosts. Rangefinder pinged, 780 meters. Too far for the M110. Way beyond comfort even for her. Her thumb brushed the safety off. All right, she murmured under her breath. Let's see how far you can go. Her first shot cracked through the silence, muted, almost delicate. A second later, the round smacked stone, a full meter left of her intended mark. Too much wind drift. She corrected instantly, micro adjustments only she could calculate by feel, not formula. Second shot. The man leading the southern element went down hard. His body folded like grass underfoot. Panic followed. The others broke formation, scattering across the low ground. Cassidy shifted her scope, tracking them one by one, a ghostly rhythm settling in: find, calculate, breathe, fire. Again. Again. 3 fell before the rest realized they were in open terrain, no cover, no salvation. She worked with the mechanical patience of a surgeon operating on time itself. Each trigger pull felt like a pulse, a promise, a choice. The M110's recoil nudged against her shoulder, warm, rhythmic. Each case ejected with a quiet, metallic breath. She didn't notice the pain creeping into her elbows or the way sweat stung her eyes. The math took over. 10 minutes later, the intercepting force was gone, broken, scattered, or dead. Cassidy released a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Seal 1, Overwatch. Southern threat neutralized. You're clear to continue movement. The reply came after a moment. Ethan Ward again. But this time his voice wasn't clipped or commanding, it was human. Overwatch, when we get back to base, I'm buying you whatever the hell you want to drink. That was, he stopped, then finished softly. That was the finest shooting I've ever seen. Cassidy smiled faintly, eyes still on the scope. Appreciate it, Commander, but I don't exist on your after-action reports. This conversation never happened. Ward chuckled, quiet and tired. Understood, whoever you are, you saved 4 lives today. Then we're even. She waited 90 more minutes before exfiltrating, discipline over comfort always. Her role was to vanish, not to celebrate. When the SEAL team reached the pickup zone and the distant thump of rotors filled the valley, Cassidy stayed prone, tracking the helicopter's slow ascent. Only when they disappeared behind the western ridge did she move. Slowly, carefully. No trace, no prints, not a single stalk of grass out of place. By the time the sun began to sink, the woman who had ended an ambush of 20 with a rifle never designed for that distance had already ghosted through the valley and was gone. 30 hours later, she sat under cold fluorescent light in a concrete room that didn't exist on any official map. Her hair was still damp from the decon shower, her hands raw from scrubbing away every speck of dirt, sweat, and blood. Colonel Mara Holt sat across from her, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. Next to Holt was a man in a gray suit, civilian, mid-40s, sharp eyes that didn't blink enough. He slid a folder across the table. Sergeant Reeve, he said, voice calm but probing. Colin Hale, Defense Intelligence Agency. He paused, almost smiling. At least that's what my badge says today. Cassidy didn't respond. She just nodded once. Holt spoke next. I've reviewed drone footage from the operation. 20 confirmed KIA at ranges between 1,400 and 2,800 meters, using an M110 semi-automatic. She leaned forward. That's shooting that shouldn't be possible with that system. Cassidy's tone was even, unflinching. With respect, ma'am, shouldn't be possible just means most people can't do it. A long silence followed. Hale's pen tapped once against the table. You've been operating in this capacity for 8 years. 143 confirmed kills in Sentinel Overwatch operations, protecting special operations teams that never knew you were there. He studied her face. Do you know how many lives that might have saved? Cassidy looked past him, eyes distant. I don't keep count. Holt smiled faintly. You should. Those men in Kandara have families, Sergeant. They'll get to go home because of you. Cassidy said nothing. Compliments made her restless. The work wasn't about pride, it was about purpose. Hale closed the folder. Lieutenant Commander Ward filed his after-action report. He mentioned an unknown sniper providing overwatch. We classified and redacted the section. But he leaned forward, lowering his voice. He's insisting on meeting whoever saved his team. That's not possible, Cassidy said immediately. My anonymity is my armor. The moment anyone knows I exist, they start looking for me. And when they start looking, you become a target, Holt finished for her. Understood. Hale folded his hands. Which is why we told him the overwatch came from a classified drone system. He doesn't need the truth. Good. The room went quiet again. Then Holt asked, What do you need, Sergeant? Cassidy hesitated. A better rifle. Holt blinked. "Excuse me." "The M110 is solid," she said, voice calm, "but I'm consistently shooting past its intended envelope. A .338 Lapua Magnum system would give me another 500 meters of reach. Plus, advanced weather monitoring. I'm guessing wind more than reading it. That's a margin we can't afford." Hale exchanged a quick look with Holt. Then Cassidy added something neither of them expected. "And I want to train others." Holt's brows lifted. "Train." "I can't be everywhere," Cassidy said. "If we had a cadre of sentinel snipers, each working under the same doctrine, stealth overwatch, extended range precision, autonomy, we could cover more teams, save more lives." Hale leaned back. "You're proposing a program." Cassidy nodded. 5 candidates to start, already qualified snipers, 6 months of specialized training, concealment, range math, solo ops endurance. If it works, you scale. If it doesn't, you've lost 5 people and some ammunition. Hale smiled slightly. Efficient proposal. Holt studied her. "You understand what you're asking, Sergeant. Creating a whole operational branch built around your skill set. It turns a shadow into a system." "I understand," Cassidy said softly. "But shadows don't stay effective if they belong to one person. I'm good, Colonel, but I'm still human. I can't watch every valley." Hale glanced at Holt, then back to her. "We'll authorize the equipment upgrades. The training program will need higher clearance for that." Cassidy nodded once. "Understood." She rose, saluted Holt, and turned toward the door. Hale's voice stopped her. "Sergeant." She paused. He looked almost curious. "Why do you do it? 8 years alone in grass and rubble, no glory, no name, no medals." Cassidy turned her head slightly. "Because someone has to make sure they get home." And then she walked out. 6 weeks later, she was back in another war zone, Syria this time. She lay among the rubble of a collapsed building, brick dust in her hair, the faint smell of burnt metal hanging in the night. A Delta Force team was raiding an ISIS command node 3 kilometers away. Cassidy's new rifle, a custom .338 Lapua Magnum with a carbon barrel and advanced optics, felt like a revelation. Smooth, deliberate, powerful. The kind of weapon that belonged in the hands of someone who understood both science and stillness. She adjusted her scope, tracking figures moving toward the Delta team's flank. 3 fighters, coordinated, smart. She exhaled and squeezed once. The first one fell, the others dove for cover. They never found it. When the assault ended, the Americans cleared the target and withdrew. They never saw her, never knew she'd been there, protecting them from the shadows. Cassidy stayed until their extraction bird disappeared, then melted away into the Syrian night, just as she had in Kandara, in Yemen, in the dozen places that existed only as coordinates in her memory. She didn't care if her name was remembered, only that no one's name ended up on a memorial because she'd missed a shot. Later that night, as she cleaned the rifle under starlight, she thought about Holt's question, "Why do you do it?" Her answer hadn't changed. "Because someone has to make sure they get home." What do you teach a soldier who already knows how to kill, but not how to wait? That was the question that haunted Cassidy Reeve as she stood on the cracked asphalt of Ashfield Ridge Training Facility, watching 5 recruits drag their gear across a field baked under the Carolina sun. The place looked forgotten, an old radar base carved into the hills, half its hangars stripped for scrap, the other half filled with silence. Perfect for secrecy, perfect for building something that wasn't supposed to exist. She'd been given 6 months and 5 candidates. That's all she'd asked for. They came from different corners of the special operations world. Marine Scout snipers, a Ranger marksman, an Air Force PJ cross-trained in recon, and one Army shooter who'd seen more combat than he'd ever admit. All men, all hardened, all looking at Cassidy with the kind of polite skepticism reserved for legends they didn't believe were real. She could feel it before anyone spoke. The unspoken question. What's a woman going to teach us about sniping we don't already know? Cassidy didn't answer with words. She walked past them, dropped her new .338 Lapua Magnum rifle onto the shooting mat and said, "Winds 10 knots, quartering from the west. Target at 2,100 meters, 6-inch steel plate. You've got 3 rounds each. Go." They went. Miss, miss, miss. Every one of them. Cassidy said nothing. She lay prone, adjusted her optic, and fired once. The metallic clang echoed through the field, distant and perfect. She stood, brushed dirt from her sleeves. "Lesson 1, she said quietly. "Math is only half the shot. The rest is rhythm, breath, stillness. You don't bend the environment, you join it." None of them laughed after that. The weeks bled together, each day a test of endurance and silence. Cassidy pushed them through 12-hour Overwatch drills. No talking, no movement, no comfort. Just wind, weight, and waiting. She made them sleep under nets while storms rolled in, calculate wind drift while their eyes burned from exhaustion, and memorize terrain so deeply they could redraw it blindfolded. At night, when the facility went quiet, she'd sit alone on the range bench, writing notes in a small black journal. Coordinates, wind formulas, names of soldiers she'd watched over but never met, each line written with a kind of reverence. Holt's voice echoed in her head sometimes. "You're building a shadow army, Cassidy. You sure you want to live with that?" Yes, because shadows saved lives. On the 50th day, one of her trainees, Sergeant Daniel Cade, broke during a night exercise. He'd held position in freezing rain for 7 hours, body stiff and mind fraying. When she found him packing his rifle, he muttered, "No target's worth this." Cassidy crouched beside him, rain dripping off her hood. "You think this is about the target?" He didn't answer. She looked out at the valley, dark and empty except for the hiss of rain on metal. "You're not shooting for you. You're shooting for the ones who'll never see you. Every bullet you send out is a promise you keep for someone else." He stared at her for a long time before setting his rifle back down. By dawn, his breathing matched the rhythm of the rain. 3 of the 5 made it to graduation. The other 2 quit before the 60-day mark. Too much solitude, too much silence. Cassidy didn't blame them. Not everyone was built for invisibility. Those who remained, Cade, Ramirez, and Locke, stood at attention before her on the final morning. No medals, no banners, just cold wind over the range and the sound of distant thunder rolling through the hills. Cassidy walked down the line, studying their faces. They weren't smiling. They understood. "Out there," she said softly, "you'll never get credit, you'll never get thanked. You'll do everything right and no one will even know you were there." She stopped in front of Cade. "Can you live with that?" He met her gaze. "If they live, ma'am, I can." Cassidy nodded. "Then you're ready." She handed each of them a small silver pin, an unmarked, unadorned piece of metal shaped like a wolf's head. No unit insignia, no serial number, just a symbol of something unspoken. "Welcome to the Sentinels," she said. Months later, the first mission came down. A SEAL platoon moving through Yemen was about to enter a kill zone. Cassidy wasn't in country, but her new sentinel, Sergeant Cade, was. She monitored from a secure console at Langley, watching through drone feeds as the terrain unfolded in shades of gray. The SEALs crawled along a dry wadi. Above them, on a distant ridge, Cade lay prone behind a custom rifle, Cassidy's training alive in every motion. She watched him adjust wind, read terrain, wait. Then the first ambush marker appeared, heat signatures in the rocks. 12 hostiles. She didn't breathe. Cade's first shot cracked through the feed, a blur of light, then a hit. The second and third followed in rhythmic precision. The enemy never knew what happened. When the SEAL team reached extraction, one of their men radioed in. "Guardian Actual, tell whoever's up there they've got a ghost watching over them." Cassidy sat back from the monitor, eyes quiet. Not a ghost, she whispered. A sentinel. Weeks turned into months. The Sentinel program expanded slowly. 3 snipers became 5, then 8, then 15. Each one trained under Cassidy's doctrine: stillness, patience, precision, morality. They were stationed across 6 combat zones: Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, the kind of places the world forgot existed until soldiers bled there. Cassidy rarely deployed anymore. Her mission had shifted from finger to mind, from trigger to teaching. But every time a report came through about an operation that ended without casualties, she saw herself reflected in the silence behind the headlines. Each life saved was a quiet echo of the same lesson she'd learned years ago in the grass of Kandara. You don't need to be seen to make a difference. And yet, on nights when the training grounds were empty, she sometimes missed the field. The weight of the rifle, the slow rise and fall of breath, the pulse of purpose. She'd lie awake in the small barracks room that served as her quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying the rhythm of her old shots, the feel of recoil, the pause before impact, the whisper of wind over her face. It wasn't nostalgia, it was something else, a quiet ache. Because in the field everything made sense. Out there it was simple: see the threat, make the choice, save the lives. Here, behind walls and bureaucracy, everything was slower, cleaner, less real. Sometimes she wondered if she was turning into what she'd always hated: a name behind glass. A year into the program, Colonel Holt visited the facility. Cassidy met her at the gate. Holt looked different now, older, wearier but proud. "They're calling your people the Invisible Hand," Holt said as they walked. "No one's supposed to know, but word leaks, stories spread. You've built something remarkable." Cassidy shook her head. "I didn't build it to be remarkable. I built it to save people." Holt smiled faintly. "You've done that more than you know." They stopped near the range, where 3 new sentinels were running distance drills. Shots cracked across the hills, sharp and perfect. Holt folded her arms. "You ever regret not taking credit?" Cassidy stared at the horizon for a long time before answering. "Credit's for people who need to be remembered. I just need them to live." That night, a message came in from Yemen. A SEAL platoon had been ambushed by a larger force, same terrain, same valley pattern as Kandara years ago. The commander leading the mission was Ethan Ward. Cassidy felt a flicker of something deep inside, recognition, maybe pride. She opened the encrypted channel, patching into the operation. The feed was chaos: gunfire, movement, comms distortion. Then a voice cut through the static, calm, centered, familiar. "SEAL Actual, this is Overwatch. I have your position. Taking fire from bearing 045, distance 1360, engaging threats." It was Cassidy. It was one of hers. Through the drone feed, she watched Ward's team move under precise, invisible cover. Each threat neutralized before it could strike, every round perfectly timed. Ward's team exfiltrated without a single casualty. The after-action report credited a classified drone Overwatch. Cassidy smiled faintly in the dark. Somewhere out there, one of her wolves had guarded the flock. Weeks later, she stood on the observation deck overlooking the range. The sun was setting behind the ridge, painting the field gold. Her trainees packed up their rifles, unaware she was watching. Cassidy's hands rested on the railing, knuckles pale. Her reflection in the glass looked older, harder, but steady. She thought about the path that brought her here, the 6 hours in the Kandara grass, the impossible shots, the men she'd saved who'd never know her name. And she wondered if, maybe, that was how it was supposed to be. Because the world didn't need more heroes. It needed guardians. Unseen, unheard, unthanked. But always there. That night she closed her training log, turned off the lights, and whispered to herself, "The best shot is the one nobody sees coming." Her voice was almost lost to the wind, But somewhere beyond those dark hills, another sentinel was lying prone in another valley, breathing with the grass, waiting, watching, protecting. And Cassidy Reeves slept, knowing the torch had been passed. Why did the quiet nights always hurt the most? Cassidy Reeves sat alone in the operations room, the glow from 3 monitors painting her face in shades of blue. Outside, wind brushed against the corrugated metal walls of Ashfield Ridge, whispering through cracks like a memory that refused to die. The last Sentinel operation had been a success. 0 casualties, target neutralized, everyone home safe. That should have felt like victory. But lately, even success came with weight. She scrolled through the post-mission report again, satellite imagery, ballistic data, timestamps, everything lined up. Yet one detail gnawed at her. A collateral mark. Civilian building within 30 meters of the engagement zone. No deaths confirmed, but no confirmations either. Cassidy leaned back, eyes closed. Her pulse drummed slow and heavy in her ears. She built this entire program around one core principle: precision saves lives, not just friendly ones. But now, even precision was starting to blur. She reached for her coffee, cold and untouched. The cup trembled faintly in her hand. "Ma'am." The voice came from the doorway, Sergeant Daniel Cade, her first Sentinel graduate. His face was drawn tight from long hours and heavier thoughts. He hesitated before stepping in. "You saw the report," she said. "Yes, ma'am. No civilian casualties confirmed, but the margin was close." Cassidy nodded slowly, too close. Cade leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "We had to take the shot. You taught us that hesitation kills." "I taught you that precision matters more," she corrected softly. "Every bullet has a consequence, even the ones that land exactly where you want them." He frowned. "With respect, ma'am, that's easy to say when you're not the one in the dirt." She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. "You think I've forgotten what that feels like?" Silence, then Cade shook his head. "No, ma'am." Cassidy's gaze drifted to the far wall, a map of the Middle East covered in red markers, each representing a Sentinel Overwatch operation. So many valleys, so many lives. "You did the right thing," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "But next time, make sure the right thing doesn't leave questions behind." Cade nodded and left quietly. When the door shut, Cassidy's reflection in the dark screen stared back at her, tired eyes, pale skin, and a shadow that seemed older than her years. A week later, she was in D.C. The conference room at the Pentagon was clean and cold, too bright, too polished for a woman who spent half her life lying in mud. The flag on the wall didn't move, but she could almost hear it whispering all the names of people who'd served beneath it. Colonel Holt sat to her left. Across the table were 3 men in suits, officials from Defense Intelligence, oversight committee types who had never felt dust in their teeth. One of them, a man with silver hair and an expensive watch, adjusted his glasses. "Sergeant Reeve, or rather, Director Reeve now, we're here to evaluate the long-term sustainability of the Sentinel Sniper program." Cassidy didn't correct him. Titles didn't mean much. She was still a soldier pretending to belong in a room full of politics. The man continued, "Your operatives have prevented at least 42 confirmed ambushes across 6 theaters, 0 friendly losses. However," he flipped a folder open, "there are ethical concerns." Cassidy's stomach tightened. "Concerns?" "Yes, field reports indicate increasing autonomy among your snipers. They're operating with near-total discretion. No direct oversight, no command confirmation before engagement. That's—" Holt interrupted, calm but firm. "That's the point. Their effectiveness relies on speed and independence. You can't ask someone at 1,800 meters to radio for permission before saving lives." The man with glasses pursed his lips. "Be that as it may, unmonitored lethal authority presence, complications, especially if a sentinel makes the wrong call. Cassidy leaned forward, voice steady but low. Then it's on me. Pardon? If they make the wrong call, it's on me, she repeated. I trained them. I gave them the trigger discipline they live by. You want accountability, you're looking at it. Another official cleared his throat. And what happens when you're not around to take the blame? Cassidy didn't answer. She didn't have to. Holt spoke instead. Then you'll have a dozen more people out there who think like her, and that's exactly what we want. The men exchanged glances, risk balanced against results. When the meeting ended, one of them approached Cassidy privately. You're building ghosts, Sergeant. The kind of ghosts this government won't know how to bury if things go wrong. She looked at him, expression unshaken. Then you'd better make sure we never fail. Months passed. The Sentinel program grew, missions multiplied. But somewhere in that expansion, something subtle began to change. The reports from the field started to sound different, less human, more clinical. Target neutralized, no further activity. Objective secured, minimal exposure. The language had lost its weight. The words felt mechanical, as if the shooters had begun to think of enemies as variables, not lives. Cassidy noticed it first in Ramirez, one of her top snipers. His performance was flawless. His empathy was fatting. He arrived one evening after rotation, quiet, eyes hollow. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always, Cassidy said. He hesitated. Sometimes I don't feel anything when I shoot anymore. Her chest tightened. Explain. He stared at the floor. Used to be I'd feel the gravity of it, the consequence. Now it's just geometry, distance, wind, drop, squeeze. The rest doesn't stick. Cassidy exhaled slowly. That's not precision, Ramirez. That's detachment. I know, his voice cracked, and I don't know which is worse, caring too much or not caring at all. She didn't have an answer. That night she stayed awake, replaying his words. When you lie in the grass long enough, the line between protection and hunting starts to blur. 2 weeks later, everything went wrong. It started as a routine overwatch in Niger. A sentinel named Locke was covering a special forces unit pinned down near a village. The enemy had embedded fighters among civilians, impossible to separate by drone. Locke made the call to fire. The engagement saved the Americans, but 3 civilians died. Cassidy received the report at 03:12 hours. She read it twice, then sat in silence for a full minute before picking up her phone. Patch me through to Locke. The connection hissed, faint static through a secure channel. Ma'am, Locke said, voice quiet but heavy. What happened? He hesitated. They were using the villagers as shields. I had 5 seconds to decide. I took the shot. Did you confirm civilian casualties? Negative visual confirmation. Positive from drone feed after the fact. Cassidy's jaw tightened. She wanted to be angry, wanted to shout, to demand why he hadn't waited, but part of her couldn't, because she'd been there. She made those calls herself. Understood, she said finally. Send me your logs and Locke. Yes, ma'am. Next time, remember, we protect lives, all of them, even when the math says we shouldn't. Yes, ma'am. She ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time. Her reflection stared back at her in the black glass of the monitor, a face she barely recognized anymore. She thought about the first time she'd pulled a trigger in the field, how she'd felt the weight of it settle into her bones. Now, that weight was spreading, not from guilt, but from the slow realization that she'd built something too powerful to completely control. 3 days later, Colonel Holt found her on the range at dawn. Cassidy was prone, staring through her scope at a steel target a mile away. She hadn't fired, just stared. You read the report, Holt said quietly. Cassidy nodded. 3 civilians, wrong place, wrong moment. That's war. Cassidy shook her head. No, that's compromise, and compromise is how programs die. Holt studied her. You've done more good than harm, Cassidy. Don't lose perspective. Cassidy's eyes stayed on the target. I'm not losing perspective. I'm remembering why I started this. We were supposed to protect the innocent, not trade them for numbers. Holt sighed. Then maybe it's time to remind them, bring them in for retraining, reground them. Cassidy finally looked up. Regrounding ghosts isn't easy, Colonel. Holt smiled faintly. Neither was creating them. That night, rain fell hard over Ashfield Ridge. Cassidy sat in her office, the rhythmic tap against the windows almost drowning out the hum of the base generator. She opened her old black journal again, the one she'd filled with coordinates and names, with small notes about every life she'd helped save. On the last page, she wrote 3 new words in neat, deliberate handwriting. Never forget wait. Then she closed the book and whispered, tomorrow we start again. Because despite everything, the politics, the mistakes, the moral fractures, she still believed in what the Sentinels were meant to be. And as long as she breathed, she would make sure they stayed what they were born to be, not hunters but guardians. Unseen, watching, waiting. Ready to rise from the grass one more time. What happens when the thing you build to save lives starts taking them without asking? Cassidy Reeve didn't sleep that week. Not really. Her body went through the motions, shower, briefing, coffee, but her mind never left Niger. The blurred drone footage replayed behind her eyes every time she blinked. Smoke, movement, chaos, 3 motionless shapes in the dust that weren't supposed to be there. She trained them to act fast, to trust their instincts. But now, that instinct had cost innocent lives. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered, you taught him to be you. She hated that voice, because it was right. By Friday, the oversight meetings began. Washington wanted answers, and they wanted them in person. Cassidy flew in under a false manifest, her escort car pulling through the west entrance of the Pentagon before sunrise. The hallways felt colder than she remembered. Every polished floor reflected faces that didn't know her story, didn't care about the dust that still clung to her soul. In the conference room, Holt was already waiting. Her expression said everything. The wolves had caught a scent. The first official to speak was a civilian named Burrow, gray suit, softer hands than any field operator she'd ever seen. Director Reeve, he began, the title sounding foreign in his mouth, we appreciate your presence. The events in Niger have prompted concern. Cassidy sat straight-backed, eyes steady. Concern or outrage, sir? Let's call it oversight. Burrow adjusted his glasses, glancing down at his file. 3 civilian deaths, 1 confirmed American operation saved. Your Sentinel fired without command authorization. That sort of independence, while tactically efficient, creates legal and ethical exposure. She didn't look away. He made a call to save a team that would have been overrun in seconds. Yes, Burrow said sharply. And in doing so he killed 3 non-combatants. You trained him, correct? Cassidy's tone stayed calm, but her jaw tightened. I did. So where does accountability fall? Here, she said, tapping her chest once. Every shot they take, I carry. Burrow looked uncomfortable. That's not how systems work, Director. Then your systems are broken. The room went silent. Holt stepped in. Gentlemen, we've already initiated internal review and retraining. The Niger incident is being handled. Handled? Burrow frowned. That's not enough. We're suspending all Sentinel deployments until this inquiry concludes, effective immediately. Cassidy felt something cold slide through her gut. You pull them out now, teams will die. Burrow folded his hands. Then perhaps those teams shouldn't rely on ghosts we can't control. Holt's voice dropped low. You're making a mistake. But Burrow just smiled faintly. No, Colonel, we're making policy. That night Cassidy sat in her temporary D.C. quarters, the city lights bleeding through the blinds. Outside, traffic whispered like distant waves. She'd been in firefights that felt less suffocating than that room. Her phone vibrated, encrypted channel. One word flashed on the screen, lock. She hesitated before answering, go ahead. His voice came through ragged. They grounded me, ma'am, pulled my clearance, said they're reviewing the shot. He stopped, breath catching. You told me once hesitation kills. I didn't hesitate. I know. Then why does it feel like I did everything wrong? Because you did everything right, she wanted to say. And still it wasn't enough. Instead, she said quietly, because right and wrong don't look the same through a scope. He exhaled shakily. What happens now? You rest, she said. Let me deal with this. She ended the call and stared out the window. In the reflection, she saw a woman with dark circles and eyes that had seen too much. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch anymore, not because they were brave, but because they'd run out of new ways to hurt. 2 weeks later, she was back at Ashfield Ridge. But it wasn't the same. The base had gone quiet, no training rounds, no laughter from the barracks, just wind and absence. A black government SUV sat parked near the main hangar. A man stood beside it, waiting. Not Holt, someone new. He extended a hand. Director Reeve, Special Agent Quinn, Defense Internal Affairs. Cassidy didn't take his hand. You're here for Locke. I'm here for the truth. Quinn had the posture of someone used to catching lies. We've got discrepancies between his version of events and satellite telemetry. Range data doesn't match. Wind corrections were off. Almost like someone tampered with the log. Her stomach tightened. That's not possible. Maybe, but whoever did it knew your system inside out. He paused. Only a handful of people have that access. Cassidy's mind started running calculations she didn't want to make. Someone inside her own program had altered a report, either to protect Locke or to manipulate the outcome. Either way, it meant corruption inside the shadows she'd built. I'll handle it, she said quietly. Quinn's eyes narrowed. This isn't your call anymore, Director. The program, under review. Technically, you don't even have clearance to handle anything. He got into the SUV and drove off, leaving dust in the wind and doubt in her chest. Cassidy stood there long after he'd gone, listening to the distant echo of her own heartbeat. She built this place to protect others. Now it was turning into a trap of its own design. By morning, she was digging through encrypted archives. Each mission log, each timestamp, each ballistic trace. And there it was, one entry with mismatched metadata, edited 34 minutes after submission. The user ID was masked, but the time zone tagged it to Ashfield Ridge. Someone had done it from inside the base. Cassidy's breath slowed. She pulled up security footage from that window. Low resolution, grainy, but enough. A figure moving toward the comms room in the early hours after the Niger op. Tall, lean, confident. Cade. Her first sentinel. Her hand froze over the keyboard. No, not him. But the time code didn't lie. She replayed it twice, then shut off the screen. Cade had once said he'd die for her program. Maybe now he was willing to kill for it too. She found him that afternoon on the far range, running wind drills with 2 new recruits. He looked the same, focused, steady, unshakable. When he saw her walking across the gravel, he dismissed the trainees with a nod. They left quietly, sensing tension. Cassidy stopped 10 feet from him. You were in the comms room the night of the Niger transmission. Cade didn't flinch. Yes, ma'am. Why? I adjusted the telemetry data. Her throat went dry. You altered an official record. I corrected it. His tone stayed even, cold. Locke's numbers didn't match. I fixed them before command could twist it against him. You covered for him, she said flatly. I protected one of ours. Cassidy stepped closer. That's not what we do. He met her eyes, defiant, unyielding. It's exactly what we do. You taught us that. Her voice dropped. I taught you to protect lives, not reputations. He took a slow breath. You think they care about lives? They'd shut us down over a technicality. They'd erase everything we built. You know that. She stared at him, the ache in her chest twisting into something colder. Maybe they should. For the first time, his mask cracked. You don't mean that. But she didn't answer. Because part of her did. That night she sat in her quarters, unable to shake his words. You taught us that. Was that true? Had she passed on not just her discipline, but her defiance too? Cassidy opened her old black journal, flipping to the earliest pages. Kandara, the valley, the shots that started it all, 8 men dead, 4 lives saved, no mistakes, no collateral. And yet the same moral geometry still applied. She'd always believed she could do the impossible, make war clean. But maybe war never stayed clean, no matter how still your hands were. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. Cassidy whispered into the dark, "What have I created?" At 200, Holt called. "Cassidy," her voice rasped, half whisper, half warning. "You need to prepare. They're sending auditors in the morning. Full shutdown pending review." Cassidy stared at the wall. "Then it's over." "Maybe," Holt said quietly. "Or maybe this is the moment you remind them why you exist." The line went dead. Cassidy looked down at her rifle case resting against the wall. Her fingers traced the latch absently. Outside, wind moved through the trees like breath through tall grass. She closed her eyes and saw the valley again. The SEAL team pinned in sunlight, the impossible shots, the moment she first understood what purpose felt like. Back then, she'd risen from the grass to protect others. Now, she'd have to rise to protect what she'd built. But this time, the threat wasn't across the ridge. It was inside her own walls. How do you defend something invisible? How do you fight for ghosts when the world demands proof they exist? Cassidy Reeves stared at the approaching convoy from the edge of Ashfield Ridge. 3 black SUVs rolling through the front gate, engines low and deliberate, their presence heavier than the vehicles themselves. The auditors had arrived. She watched them park near the old hangar, the heart of the Sentinel program, and step out one by one. Men in tailored suits, guarded eyes, flanked by 2 MPs. Paperwork and authority wrapped in expensive fabric. Holt stood waiting beside her jeep, hands tucked behind her back. "They're early," she murmured. "People like this always are," Cassidy replied. "They enjoy watching soldiers squirm." Holt gave a thin smile. "You planning to squirm?" Cassidy's gaze didn't leave the convoy. "Not today." Inside the hangar, the air smelled of gun oil and dust. Rows of shooting platforms stretched across the floor, each one a relic of the training that had built an invisible army. The auditors fanned out, taking notes, asking questions without waiting for answers. The lead investigator, Burrow, the same man from D.C., walked straight to Cassidy. His shoes clicked against the concrete. "Director Reeve." She nodded once. "Mr. Burrow." He flipped open a folder. "Effective immediately, the Sentinel sniper program is suspended pending final evaluation. All equipment will be impounded, data drives seized, personnel reassigned or released." Behind him, soldiers began moving in, technicians removing hard drives, MPs cataloging rifles. Each click of a latch sounded like a coffin closing. Cassidy stood still, her pulse a controlled drumbeat. "And when the next unit walks into an ambush without our eyes on them?" Burrow didn't flinch. "Then that's an operational risk command is willing to accept." Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. "You're willing to let people die because you're afraid of what you don't understand." Burrow looked up, meeting her eyes. "No, Director, we're afraid of what you can't control." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Hours later, the hangar was empty. The racks that once held rifles were bare. The maps and mission boards gone, the scent of gunpowder replaced by sterile emptiness. Cassidy sat alone at the firing bench, her hands folded around a cup of black coffee gone cold. Holt entered quietly. They're packing up the last of the servers. Cassidy didn't answer. Holt hesitated, then said, "We'll appeal. Try to shift oversight to Special Operations Command. There's a chance." "There's always a chance," Cassidy interrupted, her voice distant. "Until there is." She rubbed her thumb across a groove in the wood where a rifle stock had rested for years. "I built something that worked, Mara, something pure, and now they'll bury it because one mission went wrong." Holt sat beside her. "That mission didn't go wrong, it went human, and that scares them more than failure." Cassidy looked at her. "Because if they admit imperfection, they have to admit cost." "Exactly." They sat in silence for a long time. Finally Holt said, "There's one thing you should know. Someone from higher up, someone buried deep, has been asking about your files, about you." Cassidy frowned. "Who?" Holt hesitated. "Colin Hale." The name hit like static. Cassidy hadn't heard it in years. Hale, the DIA liaison who'd been there the day she first proposed the Sentinel program. The man who'd approved the rifles, the training, the doctrine. The one who'd believed in her before anyone else. "He's resurfaced." Holt nodded. "He's with Strategic Threat Analysis now, high clearance. He requested all Sentinel records last month, and what?" Holt exhaled. "Some of the deletion orders for your archives came from his desk." Cassidy froze. Hale signed the takedown. "Looks that way." She stood, the bench creaking under her movement. "Find me a way to reach him. Direct line, off-grid. He owes me more than silence." 2 days later she got it. A secured call routed through a private channel in a nondescript safe house north of Arlington. The phone buzzed once before connecting. "Cassidy Reeve," the voice said, low and measured. "Hale." A pause, then, "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," she replied. "I heard you signed off on my program's termination." Another pause. "You're not supposed to know that." "I know everything I need to." He sighed. "Cassidy, listen, this isn't personal. The landscape's changed. The more autonomous your sentinels became, the harder they were to justify. Lawmakers are nervous. Intel's nervous. Even the allies are asking questions. A unit that can strike anywhere, answerable to no one. That's a headline waiting to happen." Cassidy's voice sharpened. "We save lives, Hale. We do what your drones can't, what bureaucracy can't. You know that better than anyone." "I do, but this isn't about truth. It's about optics, the kind of optics that get careers killed." "Then kill mine," she said. "But don't kill the only thing keeping your operators alive." He hesitated. "You think I wanted this. You think I don't respect what you built. But your ghosts made too many people uncomfortable, and when people like that get scared, they erase what they can't understand." "Exactly." Her hand clenched around the receiver. "So that's it. You bury the sentinels, and we go back to pretending skill and silence don't matter." Hale's voice softened. "Cassidy, I'll do what I can, quietly. But the window's closing. If there's anything you want saved from the data purge, take it now." The line went dead. That night, Cassidy walked through the hangar for the last time. Her boots echoed on the concrete, hollow and final. She paused beside the firing lane where she'd taught Cade to breathe between wind gusts, where Ramirez had learned to stop shaking when the cold bit through his gloves. Ghosts of their voices still lived in the walls. She opened the weapons locker, the one the auditors hadn't reached yet, and stared at the lone rifle resting inside. Her first M110, the one from Kandara, the one that had made the impossible real. Its metal was worn smooth, edges dulled by time and sweat. She lifted it carefully, feeling the weight settle into her palms like an old memory. For a moment the years fell away. She was back in the tall grass again, the hum of insects, the seals pinned below, the scope filled with sun and distance. She whispered, "You and me, old friend, one last time." Then she set the rifle back in its cradle and closed the door. Morning came gray and heavy. Cassidy stood at the main gate as trucks rolled out carrying crates of hard drives, rifles, files, the entire heart of her program boxed and labeled for destruction. Burrow approached, clipboard in hand. "This is the last of it," he said. "You'll be reassigned once debriefing is complete." Cassidy looked past him at the departing trucks. "You can box up equipment," she said quietly, "but not what it meant." He tilted his head. "Meaning doesn't survive paperwork, Director. Results do." She turned to him then, and for the first time there was something sharp in her eyes. "Results are the reason your soldiers are still breathing." Burrow opened his mouth, but no words came. She walked away before he found them. That night the ridge was silent. No lights, no engines, no gunfire, just wind moving through empty buildings. Cassidy sat outside the old range office, the sky black above her. A single lamp glowed behind her shoulder, throwing soft light across the ground. Cade appeared out of the dark, boots crunching on gravel. He stopped a few feet away. "They're gone," he said. "I know." He hesitated. "So what now?" Cassidy didn't answer immediately. She watched the horizon, where dawn was just beginning to hint at the edge of night. "When I started this," she said softly, "I thought the hardest part would be surviving. Turns out it's letting go." Cade's jaw tightened. "You can't just let them end it." She looked at him. "You think I haven't tried to stop it?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am, I think you've been fighting their way. Maybe it's time we fight ours." The way he said it made her uneasy, too much conviction, too little restraint. "What are you planning?" she asked quietly. Cade's eyes flicked toward the dark hangar. "There are backups, off-site caches, systems they don't know exist. We can preserve everything, operate underground until this blows over." Cassidy stood, heart tightening. "You'd go rogue." "I'd keep the mission alive." She stepped closer, voice firm but low. "Daniel, that's not what we are. We don't fight the people we protect." His expression hardened. "And what if the people we protect are the ones killing what matters?" The question hung between them, heavy, dangerous, true. Cassidy felt something crack inside her. Not anger, not fear, something sadder. "You're starting to sound like the men we used to hunt," she said. Cade's voice broke. "No, ma'am, I'm sounding like the man you trained me to be." Then he turned and walked into the dark, leaving her standing under the cold glow of the lamp, staring after him. For a long time Cassidy didn't move. The wind rose, tugging at her hair, whispering through the grass beyond the fence line. She closed her eyes, hearing echoes of Kandara again, the shots, the silence, the fragile balance between right and necessary. This time, the enemy wasn't hiding in tall grass or broken cities. It was in what she'd created. And it was already moving. How do you hunt someone who learned everything from you? Cassidy Reeve watched the last of the ridge's lights fade behind her through the SUV's side mirror. Night swallowed the road ahead, miles of silent forest and frost-rimmed asphalt. Holt's voice echoed in her head. "He's not your responsibility anymore, Cassidy." But she knew better. When you create something dangerous, it's yours until the end. Cade had vanished 48 hours after the shutdown, taking 2 encrypted drives, a long-range rifle and enough classified data to arm a revolution. The moment the alarms tripped, Cassidy felt it like a pulse under her skin. He wasn't stealing for greed. He was trying to preserve the Sentinels in his own way. The DIA called it treason. Cassidy called it heartbreak. The trail led north through the Blue Ridge wilderness, a place Cade knew as well as she did. He'd chosen it carefully. High ground, long sightlines, radio black zones. Classic Sentinel terrain. At dawn, she parked the SUV on a fire road and shouldered a light pack. The air bit through her jacket, Frost crunched under her boots. Each step carried a weight of memory, Cade lying prone on the range years earlier, breathing with the rhythm she'd taught him. Stillness is a weapon, Daniel. Now she was walking straight into that weapon's sights. She moved like a ghost, hugging the terrain, using the same patterns she'd drilled into him. If he'd placed motion sensors, she knew where he'd hide them. If he'd built a nest, she knew the angles he'd favor. Every rock, every tree, every gust of wind became both threat and guide. Hours passed before she found his trail. Impressions in the frost, faint, precise, the kind of tracks left by someone trained to be invisible. She smiled sadly. "You're good, kid, but you're still mine." By mid-afternoon, she reached an overlook. Below, an abandoned ranger station squatted in the valley, roof half collapsed, smoke curling faintly from a chimney pipe. Her chest tightened. He was there. Cassidy slipped the scope from her pack and scanned the structure. A single heat signature inside, moving slowly, unhurried. He wasn't hiding. He wanted her to find him. She exhaled, letting the cold air burn her lungs. "All right, Daniel," she whispered. "Let's finish this the right way." The door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the place smelled of damp wood and gun oil. A small fire flickered in the stone hearth. Cade sat at a table, rifle stripped and cleaned beside him. His hands were steady, his eyes tired but clear. "Didn't think it'd take you this long," he said. Cassidy shut the door behind her. "You always did like to leave breadcrumbs." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe I wanted you to find me." She nodded at the laptop on the table. "You copied classified data. Where it going?" He looked up. "Somewhere safe." "There's no such place." He met her eyes. "There will be if people like us build it." Cassidy stepped closer, boots crunching on broken glass. "You think you're saving something, but you're not. You're burning everything we stood for." Cade's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am, I'm saving the mission. They're deleting our history, pretending we never existed. You taught me the cost of silence. You said invisibility protects lives. I'm making sure it protects the truth, too. By stealing from your own. By keeping faith with what matters." He turned the laptop so she could see the screen. Folders of classified Sentinel operations glowed faintly, data that could expose the entire program if leaked. Cassidy's stomach twisted. "You release that, and every operator in the field becomes a target." "I'm not releasing it," he said. "I'm archiving it, a record. So one day when they bury you, people will know what you did. I don't need to be remembered." He looked at her, hurt flickering behind his calm. "Then who will remember us, ma'am?" Cassidy's voice softened. "That's not what this was ever about." He stood, the firelight catching the edges of his face. "It was about protecting people, and that includes us." Cassidy shook her head. "No, it includes them, always them." The air between them thickened, full of unspoken history. Outside, wind howled through the broken windows, scattering ash across the floor. Cassidy took a step closer. "You can walk away from this, Daniel. Hand over the drives, come back with me, and we fix it together." He studied her. "You mean bury it together?" "If that's what it takes to protect the others, yes." His shoulders tensed. "You destroy your own legacy just to keep their hands clean." She hesitated. "I'd destroy myself before I let one of ours become the thing we swore to fight." Silence, then quietly he said, "Maybe you already did." Cassidy felt the words land like a bullet. For a moment neither moved. The fire popped once, throwing sparks between them. Then Cade reached into his jacket and placed something on the table, a small, silver wolf pin. The same kind she'd given him years ago. "I'm not your soldier anymore," he said, "but I'm still your shadow." He picked up his rifle case, slung it over his shoulder, and moved toward the door. Cassidy stepped into his path. "If you walk out with those drives, I can't protect you." "I don't need protection." "Daniel, don't do this." He looked at her one last time. You told me once that the best shot is the one the enemy never sees coming. Maybe it's time someone aimed that truth at the people pulling our strings." He opened the door and disappeared into the snow. Cassidy stood there, pulse pounding, torn between the soldier she was and the leader she'd become. Then she exhaled, "I'm sorry, kid." By nightfall, she was tracking him again. The storm had thickened, snow swirling under the beam of her headlamp. Each step erased the one before. She followed his trail through pines and rock, using instinct more than sight. Her body ached from cold, but her mind was a machine. This wasn't about revenge. It was about containment. If the drives went public, every sentinel in the world was dead. She found him near a frozen ridgeline, crouched by a comms terminal he'd rigged from scavenged parts. He was uploading something through a secure satellite channel. Cassidy raised her rifle, breath shallow, scope trembling against her cheek. The crosshairs hovered over his shoulder. "Don't make me do this," she thought. Then she saw his hands, steady, deliberate, no panic. He wasn't rushing. He knew she was there. Through the scope, she watched him pause and speak softly into his comms mic. "I knew you'd find me." The sound of his voice carried faintly over the wind, through her earpiece, an open channel she hadn't realized was active. "Then stop," she whispered. "Walk away. You taught me never to quit. I taught you to think." He didn't answer. Cassidy's finger tightened on the trigger. Her pulse slowed just like in Kandara years ago. The physics, the distance, the drop, all second nature. She could end this. One shot. But she didn't. Instead, she keyed her mic. "Daniel, listen to me. I was wrong." That stopped him. She continued, voice trembling against the cold. "You can't preserve something pure by breaking everything around it. We built the Sentinels to protect, not to outlive us." He turned, snow collecting on his shoulders. "Then what was it for?" "For this," she said, "for knowing when not to pull the trigger." Silence filled the channel. Then slowly, Cade lowered his hand from the transmitter. Cassidy exhaled, relief cutting through the frost. She stepped out from cover, rifle lowered. "Let's go home." He nodded once, "All right." For the first time that night, she believed him. Until the explosion hit. A flash of light ripped through the ridge as the terminal went up in flames. The blast threw them both backward, snow and debris raining down. When the ringing in her ears cleared, she saw the comms array twisted and burning, the drives gone. Cade was on his knees, coughing, blood running down his temple. "Failsafe," he rasped. I rigged it, in case they found me." Cassidy crawled to him. "What did you lose?" He looked at the fire, expression unreadable. "Everything." She stared at him, heart breaking with relief and grief all at once. "Good." He gave a weak laugh. "Guess I finally learned restraint." Cassidy reached out, gripping his shoulder. "You always had it. You just needed to remember why." He nodded faintly, eyes closing. They sat together as the snow buried the flames, two ghosts surrounded by the silence they'd both created. At dawn, rescue choppers found only one heat signature on the ridge. Cassidy stood alone beside the smoldering wreckage, Cade's wolf pin clutched in her glove. She stared out across the frozen valley, the wind tugging at her jacket, her breath a thin fog in the air. Somewhere far below, sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the snow gold for just a moment. She whispered to the horizon, "Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take." Then she turned away, leaving the ridge to the ghosts. How do you measure a life spent in shadows? By the number of lives you save, or by the weight of the ones you could? Cassidy Reeve had stopped counting both. The inquiry began 3 weeks after the Ridge incident. She arrived in D.C. under escort, silent through every checkpoint, her name scrubbed from all manifests. Officially, she didn't exist. Unofficially, she was the woman responsible for the most covert Overwatch program in U.S. military history, and for the quietest rebellion it had ever seen. They called her Director Reeve again, though the title no longer meant anything. The Sentinel program was gone, the hangar stripped, the archives burned. Daniel Cade's remains had been recovered and buried under a number instead of a name. She asked for that anonymity, even in death, because some ghosts deserved peace. The hearing took place in a small, windowless chamber beneath the Pentagon. No press, no rank insignias, just 6 men and women sitting behind a long steel table, their expressions carved from stone. Colonel Holt sat quietly beside Cassidy. She wasn't here as a superior, only as a witness. The chairman, an older general with pale eyes, began. Director Reeve, your testimony has been reviewed. We're not here to question your motives, only your methods. Cassidy folded her hands. My methods saved lives, sir. Your methods also produced an internal breach, unauthorized data extraction, and the destruction of classified equipment. Yes. He leaned forward. Then why shouldn't I call this what it looks like? Failure. She looked at him calmly. Because failure means we learn nothing, and I learned everything. A murmur rippled through the panel. Holt almost smiled. Cassidy continued, voice low but steady. The Sentinel program wasn't designed to win wars. It was designed to keep people alive long enough to come home. You gave us a mission nobody else could take, then punished us for being human when humanity made mistakes. The general's jaw tightened. You trained a generation of snipers to operate beyond oversight. That's not humanity, that's anarchy. Cassidy shook her head. No, sir, it's trust. You trusted me until it scared you. One of the civilians, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, interjected. You claim the rogue agent, Sergeant Cade, acted on his own, yet he was trained by you. Doesn't that make you responsible for his actions? Cassidy didn't look away. Yes. The woman paused, surprised. You accept that? I do, Cassidy said quietly, because leadership isn't about denying guilt, it's about carrying it. The room went silent. Holt's gaze dropped to the table. She'd seen Cassidy do impossible things, cross distances most shooters wouldn't dream of, hold still for hours in heat and pain. But this quiet, calm surrender was the bravest thing she'd ever witnessed. The general finally spoke again, his voice softer. The program is terminated. Its remaining personnel will be reassigned or discharged. You, however, you're being offered retirement under sealed conditions. No charges, no record. Cassidy nodded once, understood. Any last remarks for the record? She took a breath, yes. Every head turned. Cassidy met their eyes one by one. One day, another unit will find itself trapped and outnumbered. There won't be air support. There won't be artillery. And someone will remember there used to be people, ordinary soldiers, who watched from a mile away and kept them alive. You won't find us in your files, but you'll feel us when the first shot doesn't reach your men. That's what the Sentinels were. Not ghosts. Not killers. Guardians. Her tone softened, almost a whisper. Erase us if you need to, but understand this, you can delete names, not purpose. Then she stood, saluted once, and walked out without waiting for dismissal. Outside the day was bright, too bright. The wind smelled like spring. DC traffic murmured in the distance, horns, engines, laughter, life going on. Cassidy stood by the Potomac for a long time, watching sunlight glitter across the water. The city felt like another planet after years of dirt and silence. Holt joined her quietly, 2 coffees in hand. You handled that well, Holt said. Cassidy gave a faint smile. They already decided before I walked in. Probably, Holt sipped her coffee, but you gave them something they didn't expect. What's that? Dignity. Cassidy looked back at the river. He would have liked that, she murmured. Cade. She nodded. He thought legacy mattered. I used to think he was wrong. And now? Cassidy's gaze followed a bird cutting across the water. Now, I think legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about who remembers why you did it. Holt didn't reply. Some truths didn't need words. 2 months later, Cassidy Reeve disappeared from every system. Her government housing closed. Her records archived under sealed classification. Rumors spread quietly among special operations circles about a woman who'd trained ghosts, about a sniper who could read the wind like scripture. But no one ever found proof. Some said she'd retired to the mountains of Montana. Others whispered she was still out there, operating off-grid, keeping silent vigil over soldiers who'd never meet her. The truth was simpler. Cassidy had gone home. The cabin stood on a ridge overlooking a valley of pine and silence. It wasn't much wood, stone, and solitude, but it was enough. The air smelled of snowmelt and pine sap. When the wind moved, it made the trees whisper like old friends. Every morning she brewed coffee and stepped outside to watch the sunrise. She didn't wear a uniform anymore, didn't carry rank, but she still carried her rifle, the old M110 from Kandara, scarred and sacred, not to use, just to remember. Sometimes she'd set it across her lap and look through the scope, not at targets, just at the horizon. The motion steadied her hands, reminded her who she was. She wasn't chasing redemption anymore. She made peace with what couldn't be fixed. One evening, a black SUV appeared on the dirt road below her cabin. Cassidy didn't reach for the rifle. She just watched as the vehicle stopped and a man stepped out. Not a bureaucrat, not a soldier in uniform. It was Colin Hale, older now, lines around his eyes, hair gone to gray. He walked up the path, slow but sure, stopping a few feet from her porch. "I thought you'd be harder to find," he said. "You used to be better at losing people," she replied. He smiled faintly. "You were never easy to lose." They stood in silence for a moment, the air heavy with years and unspoken memories. Finally he said, "I came to tell you something, off record." Cassidy tilted her head. "That sounds dangerous." "Everything worth saying is." He stepped closer. "Officially, the Sentinel program never existed, but unofficially there's still a file, small, untraceable, just a name." He reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, a ridge in Yemen, a SEAL team moving through sunlight, and in the far background a faint outline of a prone figure in grass, half shadow, half legend. Cassidy smiled softly. "One of mine." Hale nodded. "Still out there, still working. Somehow they never got the memo." She looked back at the photo, eyes glistening. "Good. Thought you'd say that." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Colin." He faced her. "Why tell me?" He shrugged lightly. "Because ghosts deserve to know the world still breathes because of them." Then he walked back to the SUV and drove away, the dust curling up behind his tires until it vanished into the dusk. Later that night, Cassidy sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. The world was quiet, the kind of silence she used to crave. She held the photo in her hands, tracing the faint outline of the figure in the grass. She thought of Cade, of Holt, of the men in Kandara, of all the voices that had come and gone across her radio. Each one a heartbeat, each one a promise kept. She closed her eyes and whispered to the night, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The wind moved through the pines, gentle and endless. Far away, across some distant valley she'd never see again, a shot cracked once in the dark, clean, precise, deliberate. Cassidy smiled. The Sentinels were still watching. And that was enough.